The cruelest betrayals are never delivered by strangers, they come from the hands that once promised to protect you. Snow drifted across the weathered roof of the Bennett farmhouse as if the sky itself wanted to hide what was about to happen. Every board creaked beneath the weight of another bitter winter, and the cold wind slipped through every crack in the walls, carrying away what little warmth remained inside. Charlotte Bennett stood silently near the front door, her fingers wrapped around a faded wool shawl that had belonged to her grandmother years before. At 22, she had learned that silence often hurt less than pleading. Her light brown hair rested loosely against her shoulders, and her pale face carried neither anger nor fear, only the quiet exhaustion of someone who had spent a lifetime trying to earn love that was never meant for her. Across the small kitchen table, her father counted a stack of silver coins with careful hands while her mother avoided looking into Charlotte's eyes. Neither of them spoke her name. To them, she was no longer a daughter. She had become a solution. Outside, a pair of heavy wagons waited beneath the gray morning sky, their wheels half buried in fresh snow. Thick horses stamped impatiently against the frozen ground while several traders wrapped in dark winter coats exchanged quiet conversations that disappeared into the icy wind. Charlotte could hear every sound through the thin wooden walls, each hoofbeat counting down the final moments of the only home she had ever known. She glanced toward the narrow hallway where her younger brother Ethan still slept beneath patched blankets, unaware that when he opened his eyes, his sister would already be gone. A faint smile touched her lips. She hoped he would never learn the price that had been placed on her life. Her mother finally broke the silence with a voice so calm it felt colder than the winter air. At least one child can still help this family. The words settled over the room like falling ash. Charlotte lowered her eyes, not because she believed them, but because arguing would only make Ethan hear the truth. She stepped forward without resistance and carefully folded her grandmother's shawl around her shoulders. The trader waiting at the doorway nodded impatiently, motioning for her to follow. As Charlotte crossed the threshold, she noticed old Mrs. Parker struggling against the freezing wind beside the neighboring fence. The elderly Omega's thin blanket had slipped into the snow, leaving her trembling beneath the icy gusts. Without hesitation, Charlotte removed her own warm shawl and gently placed it around the older woman's shoulders. "You'll need this more than I will," she whispered with a soft smile. Mrs. Parker's eyes widened in disbelief. "But child, you'll freeze." Charlotte simply shook her head. "Kindness stays warm longer than wool." The old woman watched in stunned silence as Charlotte turned away before gratitude could become another goodbye. The traders exchanged puzzled glances. They had seen fear, anger, tears, even desperate attempts to escape. They had never seen someone willingly surrender the last warm thing she owned moments before being taken away forever. Charlotte climbed into the wagon without complaint, folding her hands neatly across her lap as chains rattled somewhere behind the other passengers. Snowflakes settled gently across the wooden rails while the horses began pulling the caravan down the frozen road leading away from the village. She never looked back. Not because she had forgotten the place she called home, but because every memory worth carrying lived beside a little boy who deserved the chance to grow up believing someone in the world had loved him without conditions. High above the winding road, hidden among frost-covered pine trees, a lone white wolf stood motionless upon the ridge. Its silver eyes followed the departing wagon with impossible patience before disappearing soundlessly into the endless winter forest. The wagon rolled steadily across the frozen countryside, its wooden wheels carving deep tracks into fresh snow that stretched for miles beneath a pale winter sky. Charlotte Bennett sat quietly against the rough side of the wagon, her hands folded in her lap while the cold air slipped through the wooden slats. Around her, several frightened Omegas avoided eye contact, each carrying a different story of loss that none of them wished to tell aloud. Every few minutes the traders laughed among themselves, speaking about prices, buyers, and profits as though the people behind them were nothing more than cargo. Charlotte lowered her eyes, refusing to let bitterness settle inside her heart. She reached into the small cloth pouch hidden beneath her dress and discovered the final piece of bread she had tucked away before leaving home. It was hardly enough for a single meal, yet she smiled softly, grateful that she still had something to give if the opportunity appeared. Hours passed before the caravan stopped beside a narrow mountain pass where the horses could drink from a partially frozen stream. The traders climbed down to stretch their legs, leaving the passengers under careful watch. Charlotte noticed another wagon parked farther ahead, surrounded by several armed escorts. Unlike the others, this wagon carried only one prisoner. Heavy iron restraints circled his wrists, and a long dark cloak covered most of his face beneath the hood. He remained perfectly still despite the freezing wind, as though silence itself had become part of his strength. None of the traders dared speak directly to him. They only muttered that he was dangerous, mysterious, and worth delivering alive. Charlotte studied him for a quiet moment. Although his hands were restrained, his posture remained calm, almost regal, as if no chain had ever truly reached his spirit. She climbed carefully from her wagon while the guards were distracted loading supplies and walked toward the prisoner with slow, cautious steps. Without saying a word, she held out the last piece of bread. The hooded man slowly lifted his head. Beneath the shadow, a pair of striking silver eyes met hers with quiet surprise. They were not the frightened eyes of someone defeated by captivity. They carried patience, intelligence, and an unusual sense of peace. Charlotte smiled gently. "You probably need this more than I do." For a brief moment neither of them spoke. Snow drifted between them while the wind carried distant sounds from the restless horses. Finally, the man accepted the bread. With restrained hands. "If you give away your last meal," he asked in a calm voice, "what will you eat?" Charlotte shrugged lightly. "There will always be another meal someday. But hunger feels much longer when someone believes nobody cares." The stranger looked down at the bread before speaking again. "You do not even know who I am." Charlotte answered without hesitation. "I do not have to know someone to choose kindness." A faint expression almost resembling a smile touched the corner of his mouth before disappearing beneath his composed expression. "That is a rare belief." Before Charlotte could answer, one of the traders shouted for everyone to return to the wagons. She nodded politely and stepped away, never realizing that every word had been carefully remembered. As her wagon began moving once more, the mysterious prisoner watched the falling snow through the wooden bars. Hidden beyond the next ridge, several figures dressed as ordinary travelers quietly observed the caravan from horseback. Their attention never left the wagon carrying the chained man. They awaited no rescue because none was needed. The prisoner was not an ordinary captive. He was Alexander Ashford, the Alpha King himself, traveling in disguise to uncover the kingdom's largest network of Omega trafficking from within. For weeks he had searched for proof strong enough to destroy the organization completely. Yet among all the deception he had witnessed, the greatest surprise had not been the traders or their crimes. It had been a young woman who possessed nothing except compassion and still chose to give away her final piece of bread to a stranger whose name she did not even know. As the caravan disappeared deeper into the endless white wilderness, Alexander quietly closed his hand around a small piece of bread, realizing that destiny sometimes announced itself not with power, but with an act of quiet kindness. By late afternoon the caravan reached Black Ridge Crossing, a trading town built where 3 mountain roads met beneath towering cliffs covered in snow. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and the sharp sound of iron striking iron echoed through the crowded streets as blacksmiths worked beside merchants preparing for the next market day. To most travelers it appeared to be another busy winter settlement, but Charlotte immediately sensed the heavy silence hiding beneath the ordinary routine. Too many guards stood watch without speaking. Too many frightened faces disappeared the moment strangers approached. The wagons rolled through the main gate before stopping inside a large fenced courtyard surrounded by aging warehouses. Several other groups of Omegas had already arrived, each waiting quietly beneath wooden shelters that offered little protection from the freezing wind. Charlotte climbed down carefully and glanced around the crowded yard. Some people stared at the ground, others held one another for comfort, while a few simply watched the falling snow with empty expressions that suggested hope had become too difficult to carry. A young Omega girl, no older than 8, sat alone beside a stack of empty barrels with tears frozen upon her cheeks. Her thin coat was several sizes too large, and her small hands shook from both fear and cold. Charlotte slowly walked toward her and knelt so their eyes met at the same level. "May I sit with you?" she asked softly. The little girl gave the smallest nod. Charlotte settled beside her without another word, allowing the silence to feel safe before speaking again. "What is your name?" "Emily," the child whispered. "I cannot find my mother." Charlotte felt her heart tighten, yet she refused to let sadness appear on her face. Instead she smiled with gentle warmth. "Then until you do, you will not be alone." She carefully removed the ribbon that held back her light brown hair and tied it around Emily's wrist. "See this? As long as you have it, you can remember that someone is thinking about you." The little girl stared at the faded ribbon as though it were something precious beyond measure. Nearby, an elderly Omega struggled to carry a heavy wooden bucket filled with water across the icy ground. Without hesitation Charlotte stood and hurried over, taking one side of the bucket before the older woman could protest. Together they carried it safely into the shelter where several others quietly thanked her. With grateful smiles. None of them had anything to offer in return except kind words, yet Charlotte accepted those as though they were gifts of great value. High above the courtyard, from the narrow window of a locked storage building, Alexander Ashford observed every moment in complete silence. The heavy restraints around his wrists remained in place for anyone watching, but his sharp silver eyes missed nothing below. He had spent years judging warriors by courage and leaders by wisdom, yet the young woman he had met on the mountain road continued to reveal a strength that required neither title nor power. She had lost her home, her family, and nearly every possession she owned, yet she still noticed the suffering of everyone except herself. One of his most trusted royal guards, disguised as an ordinary merchant, quietly approached beneath the window and gave the smallest respectful nod. Alexander answered with an almost invisible movement of his hand, signaling that the operation would continue exactly as planned. They still needed the leaders of the trafficking network to gather before making their move. The waiting would place innocent people at risk for another day, and that burden weighed heavily upon him. Yet exposing only a handful of criminals would allow countless others to escape. He forced himself to remain patient. As evening settled across Black Ridge Crossing, lanterns flickered to life throughout the marketplace while snow continued falling in slow, silent waves. Charlotte wrapped an extra blanket around little Emily before sitting beside her beneath the shelter, looking toward the distant mountains where darkness slowly swallowed the last light of day. She did not notice the lone white wolf standing motionless beyond the outer fence, watching over the crowded yard with calm silver eyes before disappearing once again into the endless winter forest. Morning arrived beneath a sky the color of weathered steel, and Black Ridge Crossing awakened with an uneasy energy that spread through every frozen street. Merchants polished wooden platforms, banners were raised above the marketplace, and long rows of empty chairs appeared around the central square. As though the town were preparing for a grand celebration instead of a day that would decide countless lives. Charlotte Bennett stood beside Emily beneath the shelter, watching workers carry polished railings toward a large stage built in the center of the market. She noticed how carefully everything was arranged, from the fresh pine branches decorating the platform to the polished lanterns hanging overhead. The beauty of the decorations could not hide the sadness beneath them. It only made the truth feel heavier. Emily quietly slipped her small hand into Charlotte's. "Will they separate us?" she whispered. Charlotte looked down at the frightened child before offering the same gentle smile that had comforted so many others. "I cannot promise what today will bring, but I can promise that you will not face it alone." Those simple words eased the fear in the little girl's eyes, if only for a moment. Nearby, an elderly Omega struggled to lift a basket filled with folded blankets intended for the holding shelters. Charlotte immediately walked over and helped carry the weight without waiting to be asked. As they crossed the icy courtyard, another young woman accidentally dropped a small cloth pouch, spilling several family photographs across the snow. Charlotte quickly knelt to gather each picture before the wind could carry them away. She brushed the snow gently from every faded photograph and returned them with both hands. The young woman stared at the pictures, her eyes filling with quiet gratitude. "These are all I have left," she whispered. Charlotte simply nodded. "Then they are worth protecting." Every act was small, almost invisible amid the growing crowd, yet someone continued noticing each one. From an upper room overlooking the square, Alexander Ashford remained beside the narrow window, his silver eyes following Charlotte as carefully as before. One of his commanders entered silently, dressed in the plain clothing of an ordinary grain merchant. He unfolded a rough map across the table. Tiny marks surrounded every entrance leading into the marketplace. Royal guards had already taken positions inside bakeries, warehouses, taverns, and trading stalls. Throughout the town, every road leaving Blackridge Crossing was now quietly watched by loyal soldiers disguised as travelers, craftsmen, and laborers. The commander lowered his voice. "Nearly all of the major buyers have arrived. By sunset the organizers should reveal themselves." Alexander studied the map before looking once more toward the courtyard below. "No one moves until every leader is present," he answered calmly. "We end the entire network today, not just the people standing in front of us." The commander nodded without hesitation, understanding the weight of those words. Patience would spare many more innocent lives in the future, even if it demanded courage in the present. Outside, preparations continued across the square. Wealthy visitors wearing expensive winter coats arrived in elegant horse-drawn carriages while traders greeted them with practiced smiles. To anyone passing through the town, everything appeared orderly and respectable. Only those trapped behind the wooden fences understood the quiet fear hidden beneath the polished surface. As the afternoon sun struggled through heavy clouds, snowflakes drifted slowly over the marketplace, settling upon Charlotte's light brown hair while she helped Emily adjust the oversized coat around her shoulders. She looked toward the distant mountains for only a brief moment, unaware that destiny had already begun moving around her from every direction. Above the rooftops, a white wolf stood silently upon the highest ridge, watching the crowded town with unwavering silver eyes as though waiting for the exact moment when justice would finally step into the light. The afternoon bells echoed across Blackridge Crossing, each deep chime reminding every captive that the waiting was nearly over. Workers carried polished wooden signs into the center of the square while merchants arranged long tables covered with thick ledgers, neatly stacked papers, and polished lanterns that would remain lit after sunset. Snow continued drifting from the gray sky, softening the rooftops and fences without easing the tension hanging over the crowded marketplace. Charlotte Bennet stood among the other Omegas as guards instructed everyone to line up according to numbered wooden tags fastened to their sleeves. Some quietly lowered their heads while others held back frightened tears, uncertain what the next hour would bring. Emily instinctively reached for Charlotte's hand, her small fingers trembling against the cold. Charlotte squeezed them gently. "Stay close to me," she whispered. "No matter what happens, keep believing that tomorrow can still be different." The little girl nodded, drawing comfort from the calm confidence in Charlotte's voice. Nearby, another elderly Omega stumbled after slipping on a patch of ice while carrying a bucket of clean water toward the shelter. Before anyone else reacted, Charlotte stepped forward, caught the bucket before it spilled, and helped the woman regain her balance with patient kindness. The older woman smiled through grateful eyes. "You keep helping everyone, even when nobody is helping you." Charlotte answered softly, "If kindness disappears, then they have taken more than our freedom." Those quiet words lingered in the cold air long after the conversation ended. From the upper floor of the storage building overlooking the square, Alexander Ashford watched every moment with thoughtful silence. His silver eyes remained fixed upon Charlotte as she comforted frightened strangers instead of worrying about herself. The simple acts she performed required no audience and expected no reward. That truth carried more weight than any noble title or family name. His most trusted commander stepped beside him once again, carefully scanning the marketplace below. "Every major organizer has arrived," he reported. "The buyers believe tonight will be their most profitable gathering of the season. Our people are in position at every gate, every warehouse, and every road leading out of town." Alexander slowly folded the map resting on the table beside him. "Good," he replied calmly. No innocent person leaves here carrying fear, and no guilty person leaves believing they escaped justice. The commander bowed respectfully before disappearing without another word. Outside, elegant horse-drawn carriages continued arriving one after another, bringing wealthy visitors. Wrapped in expensive winter coats. They greeted the organizers with polished smiles, never noticing the ordinary bakers, stable workers, merchants, and travelers scattered throughout the square who were, in truth, members of the royal guard quietly awaiting a single command. Their disguises were flawless, their patience unwavering. The entire marketplace had become a carefully prepared net waiting to close. As the final light of day settled behind the snow-covered mountains, workers lit dozens of lanterns around the large wooden platform at the center of the square. Their warm glow reflected across the falling snow, creating a strange contrast between beauty and sorrow. Charlotte looked toward the stage without fear, only quiet resolve. She could not control what others intended to do, but she could choose the person she remained until the very end. Across the courtyard, Alexander rested one restrained hand against the cold wooden window frame. For the first time since beginning his investigation, certainty settled firmly within his heart. The woman who had shared her last meal with a stranger, comforted frightened children, protected precious memories, and chosen compassion over despair had revealed a strength that no chain could ever restrain. The hour he had been waiting for was almost here, and when the next bell echoed across Blackridge Crossing, neither Charlotte Bennet nor the kingdom itself would ever be the same again. The first evening bell rang with a slow, solemn echo that rolled across Blackridge Crossing like distant thunder, and every conversation inside the marketplace faded into silence. Lanterns flickered beneath the falling snow, casting long golden reflections across the wooden platform where the final preparations had been completed. One by one, the organizers stepped forward with confident smiles, greeting wealthy visitors as though they were hosting an honorable gathering instead of a marketplace built upon broken lives. Charlotte Bennet stood quietly among the other Omegas, her numbered tag pinned neatly to her sleeve while Emily remained close beside her. The little girl looked up with frightened eyes. "Will they call us soon?" she whispered. Charlotte gently brushed a loose strand of hair away from the child's face before answering with the same calm voice that had become a source of comfort. "Whatever happens next, remember that your worth has never belonged to anyone else. Nobody can place a price on your heart." Emily managed a faint smile and held Charlotte's hand a little tighter. Across the square, the mysterious prisoner remained inside the wooden holding enclosure, his wrists still surrounded by heavy iron restraints for everyone to see. Traders occasionally glanced toward him with uneasy expressions, uncertain why such extraordinary precautions had been ordered for a single captive. Alexander Ashford stood perfectly still, his silver eyes quietly studying every movement unfolding around the marketplace. Every organizer had arrived exactly as expected. Every buyer had gathered within the square. Every hidden member of the royal guard had reached the assigned position without attracting attention. The investigation that had taken months to complete had finally reached its final moment. A disguised commander walked past the holding enclosure carrying an ordinary crate of supplies. Without looking directly at Alexander, he spoke only 4 carefully chosen words. "Everyone is in place." Alexander gave the smallest nod, almost impossible for anyone else to notice. "Then we wait for the signal." The commander continued walking without breaking his pace, disappearing into the growing crowd. Snow continued falling gently over the town, softening rooftops, fences, and wagon tracks beneath a quiet white blanket. Yet beneath that peaceful scene, every loyal soldier remained alert, hidden among merchants, stable workers, travelers, and shopkeepers. No one outside the royal guard realized the entire marketplace had already been surrounded. Near the center of the square, an elderly organizer climbed onto the wooden platform and unrolled a long scroll containing the evening's list of names. The crowd gradually gathered closer while murmurs spread from one corner of the marketplace to another. Charlotte lowered her eyes briefly before taking a slow breath. Fear still existed somewhere inside her. But it no longer controlled her. She had already lost everything that could be taken away. All that remained belonged to her alone, her compassion, her dignity, and her choice to meet every stranger with kindness instead of bitterness. As the organizer prepared to begin reading the names, one of the younger assistants accidentally dropped a small wooden box filled with official documents onto the snowy ground. Papers scattered in every direction as a cold gust swept across the square. Without hesitation, Charlotte stepped forward, gathering each page before the wind carried them away. She carefully stacked every document and returned them with both hands, earning only a brief nod of appreciation before quietly returning to her place beside Emily. From across the marketplace, Alexander watched the scene unfold with thoughtful silence. Even now, standing only moments away from uncertainty, she instinctively protected the work of another person without expecting recognition. In that simple act he found the final answer he had not realized he was searching for. Strength was not measured by titles, wealth, or power. Sometimes it revealed itself in the quiet decision to remain kind when the world offered every reason to become cold. The final bell suddenly echoed across Blackridge Crossing, deeper and louder than the first. Every conversation stopped. Every lantern seemed to glow a little brighter against the gathering darkness. The organizer slowly lifted the scroll and opened his mouth to announce the first name, while high above the marketplace, unseen beneath the shadows of snow-covered rooftops, dozens of loyal royal guards silently rested their hands upon the emblems hidden beneath their winter cloaks, waiting only for the command that would change the fate of everyone standing in the square. The marketplace became so quiet that even the soft whisper of falling snow seemed louder than the voices of the crowd. The elderly organizer slowly unrolled the long parchment and adjusted his spectacles before reading the first names with practiced confidence. One after another, frightened Omegas stepped onto the wooden platform, standing beneath the lantern light while buyers quietly exchanged approving nods and scribbled notes inside expensive leather books. Charlotte Bennet remained beside Emily, gently squeezing the little girl's hand whenever another name echoed across the square. Although fear lingered in every corner of the marketplace, Charlotte continued offering reassuring smiles to those standing nearest her, reminding them through quiet kindness that despair did not have to be the final chapter of their story. Then the organizer paused, glanced farther down the parchment, and spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. Charlotte Bennet. The sound of her own name drifted through the cold evening air. Emily immediately wrapped both arms around Charlotte's waist. "Please do not go," the child whispered, her voice trembling. Charlotte knelt until their eyes met. She carefully untied the faded ribbon from Emily's wrist and tied it once again with gentle fingers. "Keep this," she said softly. "One day, when you are no longer afraid, remember that courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing kindness even when fear is standing beside you." Emily nodded through tearful eyes before reluctantly letting go. Charlotte rose gracefully and walked toward the wooden platform with calm, measured steps. The crowd watched in complete silence as she climbed the short staircase and stood beneath the glowing lanterns. The organizer briefly studied the parchment before announcing that she would remain on the platform until the formal proceedings began. Charlotte quietly folded her hands before her, lifting her eyes toward the snow-covered sky instead of the crowd surrounding her. She noticed the first evening star appearing between the drifting clouds and allowed herself one peaceful breath. Across the marketplace, inside the wooden holding enclosure, Alexander Ashford slowly raised his head. Every leader of the trafficking network now stood together in one place. Every hidden royal guard had confirmed readiness. There was nothing more to wait for. His silver eyes settled upon Charlotte as she stood alone beneath the lantern light, still carrying herself with quiet dignity despite everything she had endured. At that moment he understood with absolute certainty that destiny had not brought him to Blackridge Crossing merely to complete an investigation. It had brought him to meet the woman whose heart had remained untouched by cruelty. A disguised commander passed close to the enclosure for the final time. Without stopping, he spoke only 2 words. "Now, Majesty." Alexander lowered his gaze toward the iron restraints surrounding his wrists. They had served their purpose. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted both hands. The heavy locks that had convinced every criminal they controlled their most valuable prisoner suddenly released with a clear metallic click, dropping harmlessly onto the wooden floor below. Several nearby traders turned instinctively toward the unexpected sound. Confusion spread across their faces as the mysterious prisoner calmly stepped forward, no longer carrying himself like a captive but with the effortless confidence of someone born to command. Before anyone could speak, dozens of ordinary merchants, travelers, blacksmiths, and stable workers throughout the marketplace reached beneath their winter cloaks and revealed the silver wolf crest of the royal guard upon their uniforms. One by one they stepped into the open, forming a disciplined circle around the square with remarkable precision. Gasps rippled through the frozen crowd as realization replaced confusion. Charlotte looked toward the familiar silver eyes she had first met on the snowy mountain road. The quiet stranger who had accepted her final piece of bread now stood tall without chains, his calm expression unchanged, yet the unmistakable authority surrounding him transformed the entire marketplace. Snow drifted gently between them as the last illusion disappeared, and every person present understood that the balance of power had shifted forever. Silence settled over Blackridge Crossing with astonishing speed. The confident smiles that had filled the marketplace only moments before disappeared beneath expressions of disbelief as the silver wolf crests of the royal guard caught the lantern light from every direction. Charlotte Bennet remained standing upon the wooden platform, unable to look away from the man she had first met as a quiet prisoner along the snowy mountain road. The heavy chains that had hidden his true identity now rested harmlessly upon the ground behind him, and every step he took carried the calm authority of someone who had never truly been anyone's captive. His dark winter cloak moved gently with the evening wind as he crossed the square, while the crowd instinctively stepped aside without being asked. No voice needed to announce his importance. His presence alone transformed the entire marketplace. The elderly organizer who had controlled the proceedings only moments earlier lowered his head, his hands trembling so badly that the parchment slipped from his fingers and disappeared beneath the falling snow. One by one, the traders and wealthy visitors looked toward the silver emblem surrounding them, finally realizing that every road, every gate, and every escape had quietly vanished before the gathering had even begun. Alexander Ashford stopped at the foot of the platform and lifted his eyes toward Charlotte. For a brief moment, the crowded square seemed to disappear. There were no merchants, no guards, no frightened spectators. There was only the young woman who had offered kindness when she believed she had nothing left to give. Charlotte searched his familiar silver eyes, slowly recognizing the calm voice that had asked why she would share her last piece of bread with a stranger. A quiet breath escaped her lips as understanding finally settled into her heart. "It was you," she whispered. Alexander answered with the faint, genuine smile she had never seen before. "Yes. And you never asked for my name before choosing compassion." He stepped onto the platform with measured confidence until they stood only a few feet apart. Snowflakes drifted gently between them, glowing beneath the lanterns like tiny stars. "Charlotte Bennet," he said clearly enough for every person in the square to hear, "during the days I traveled in disguise, I witnessed fear, greed, and betrayal. Yet I also witnessed a woman who gave away her warmth, her food, her comfort, and even her hope without expecting anything in return. Power can command obedience, but only kindness earns loyalty." The marketplace remained completely still. Even the restless horses seemed unusually quiet, as though the entire town wished to hear every word. Alexander slowly extended his hand toward Charlotte, not as an order, but as an invitation. After a brief moment, she placed her hand gently in his. The instant their fingers met, a soft silver glow shimmered briefly around the delicate wolf-shaped birthmark hidden beneath Charlotte's wrist, while an identical light appeared beneath the cuff of Alexander's sleeve. The glow was gentle, warm, and gone almost as quickly as it had appeared, yet hundreds of witnesses had already seen it. Quiet whispers spread through the crowd as ancient stories long dismissed as legends suddenly felt real again. Alexander looked down at the matching mark before meeting Charlotte's astonished eyes. "The moon has spoken," he said softly. "Not through power, but through truth." Charlotte felt neither fear nor confusion. Instead, an unexpected sense of peace settled deep within her heart, as though every lonely mile of her journey had quietly led to this single moment. Around them, members of the royal guard respectfully lowered their heads, recognizing the sacred sign that had appeared before them. Emily watched from the front of the crowd, her faded ribbon still tied carefully around her wrist, and smiled with joyful tears as hope finally replaced fear. Above the marketplace, the clouds slowly parted to reveal a sky filled with bright winter stars, their light reflecting across the snow-covered rooftops while the first promise of a new beginning settled gently over Blackridge Crossing. For several long moments, no one spoke. Snow continued falling across Blackridge Crossing, covering the abandoned ledgers and scattered contracts that had once reduced lives to numbers on a page. Under the quiet glow of the lanterns, Alexander Ashford stood beside Charlotte Bennet, their hands still gently joined as the silver light faded from the matching marks upon their wrists. The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt like the closing of one chapter and the careful beginning of another. Alexander slowly turned toward the gathered crowd, his calm expression carrying the quiet certainty of a ruler whose decision had already been made long before this night. His voice carried clearly across the frozen marketplace without the need for raised volume. From this moment forward, no Omega within this kingdom will ever again be treated as property. No family will be permitted to sell a child. No marketplace will profit from fear. Every agreement made here today is forever void. His words echoed through the square, and one by one, the royal guards respectfully collected the ledgers, contracts, and wooden records that had symbolized years of injustice. Instead of celebration, the marketplace filled with quiet relief. Parents embraced their children. Friends found one another after believing they had been separated forever. Emily ran across the snowy ground and wrapped her arms around Charlotte once more, laughing through joyful tears. Charlotte held the little girl close before gently brushing the snow from her hair. "You kept your ribbon," she whispered with a smile. Emily proudly lifted her wrist. "Because you told me courage stays even when fear leaves." Charlotte nodded softly. "And now you can begin a new story." Alexander watched the exchange with quiet admiration before stepping closer. "Emily," he said warmly, "you and every child here will return home under the protection of the crown. No one will stand alone again." The little girl looked at him with wide eyes before smiling brighter than the lanterns surrounding the square. Nearby, several elderly Omegas wiped grateful tears from their faces while neighbors helped one another gather blankets and personal belongings. The frozen marketplace that had once represented despair slowly transformed into a place where strangers greeted one another with hope instead of fear. As dawn approached, pale golden light spread across the snow-covered rooftops of Blackridge Crossing. The first rays of morning reflected against the mountains, turning the endless fields of white into shimmering gold. Alexander and Charlotte walked together toward the edge of the square where the white wolf waited peacefully beside the open road. The magnificent animal bowed its head before disappearing silently into the surrounding forest, as though its duty had finally been fulfilled. Charlotte looked toward the awakening horizon, still struggling to understand how quickly her life had changed. Only days earlier she had believed she was leaving the world without anyone seeing her worth. Now she stood beside the strongest alpha king in the kingdom, not because of wealth, family, or power, but because kindness had guided every step she chose to take. Alexander gently looked toward her with quiet sincerity. "Many people spend their lives searching for strength," he said. "You carried it with you long before we met." Charlotte smiled, her eyes reflecting the warmth of the rising sun. "I only tried to become the person I wished someone had been for me." Alexander's expression softened. "Then this kingdom has found its future Luna." Around them, the people of Blackridge Crossing watched with grateful smiles as a new day began beneath clear winter skies. No grand celebration was needed, because the greatest victory had already taken place inside countless hearts that finally believed tomorrow could be different. The road ahead would still hold challenges, and healing would take time, but hope had returned where fear once ruled. Sometimes destiny arrived through crowns and kingdoms. Sometimes it arrived through quiet acts of compassion offered with empty hands. And on a cold winter morning, The young woman who had once been sold by those who should have loved her became the living reminder that true strength is gentle, kindness is never wasted, and the smallest act of goodness can change the future of an entire kingdom.